Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with the now well entertained Teos Avadia. You have been entertained.
Am I not entertained? I am super entertained. I saw the D&D movie.
Yes.
I mean, I can't believe it was all flumps all the time. That was unexpected. I mean, the rain of flumps being summoned, couldn't believe it. The Underdark
Yes.
flumps, that everybody was playing a flump. If you've seen the trailers, you know what I'm talking about. Or maybe it's that,
Sure.
yeah, I imagined it. But no, I mean, I would say go see it.
They confirmed.
It was great.
Yeah. They confirmed during the movie that next edition will have a flump race, a flump class, a flump subclass, several flump magic items. So that's really all the movie
Yeah.
was about.
Yeah, and my Duke women are still in the
Oh,
tournament. Go Devils. The men had a great season, but have decided to take a little long vacation, which is what we really I wish I could do. So yeah, fair.
yeah. It's very brave of you to wear a Duke shirt after a loss, but I appreciate your stick to itiveness.
That is a thing that I've always heard said when I was at school. There, it's like if you lose, the next day you wear your shirt, like a different shirt, because that shirt is unlucky. It needs to be washed. You throw that one in the wash, but you wear another Duke shirt, and I think it's a good mantra for life. Like you fail and don't like hide whatever you failed at. Like be proud of it. Keep going. There's always progress. It was a great season, so I have no problem flying the colors.
Awesome.
But also, our Duke women play tonight, so I'm hopeful.
Well, speaking of horrible failures, we should get on with our podcast. And we're going to go right to our listener corner to talk with some of our listeners. The first is Falcon Neal via Patreon. A question for the show. I watched an optimization video where the host was tar and feathering Wizards of the Coast because of the low quality of the playtest document. They weren't complaining about the creative ideas or intent. They were complaining about the clarity of the rule text, the playability of the mechanic, and unintended and unexpected consequences of the rule update. I commented with partial agreement, saying that this document seemed very raw and not what I'd expected from a broad professional effort going out to tens of thousands of people. If it was a first draft, it was probably fine. But is it actually appropriate to this audience that first drafts are being released and that the rules haven't gone through more of a quality review before we're seeing them to test? Did they have a second set of eyes looking at the text before releasing it? Is Wizards just using the C team of developers for this initial stage and not getting their most experienced people involved till later on? And my answer to that is all play tests are handled differently. I would not say that this is great or terrible. I would say that it is right about on par with what I would be expecting from the play test that they are engaged in terms of their expectations, in terms of the amount of people they have working on it, in terms of the outcome that they're envisioning. I think it's probably right on.
There are a couple of things here that I think are really interesting and cool aspects of the question. One is, is it a C team of people? So I'd say that anybody at Wizards of the Coast is not a C team member; they're an A team member. Um, even though there are different levels of experience or whatever, I mean, there are really good people on there, and so it's kind of all A team. But um, having worked on many projects, right? Sometimes someone is really great at the concept of it, but not necessarily the wording of it. Um, and there are multiple passes, right? I write things that I think are English, and then an editor hits them, and suddenly they really do actually
Mhm.
become fantastic English, and rules speak English and things like that. So what is likely not happening here, and maybe part of it, is that there probably is no editorial pass. Really, I'm sure there are second sets of eyes, but it's not being. There isn't time given to these kinds of playtests usually to make it read really well. Like, that's just not part of what you have time for in the process. So it's probably being discussed, it's being played around with, it's looked at by numerous people, and it's written up, and it goes out to see what we think. And yes, it's going out to tens of thousands, but it's not, and I think fortunately so, being treated as a marketing piece. It's really about getting that feedback back.
Mhm.
So So I don't think the normal number of passes are taking place, and we are seeing rough takes. And their point is not to say do we like the wording, but how do we react to the concepts and ideas that are there.
Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head there. Would you rather have it take another 2 weeks and be spell checked and laid out, not spell checked, but edited, laid out nicely, art, all that stuff? Or would you rather get it 2 weeks sooner and have an extra 2 weeks to actually use it?
And I
So,
will
yeah,
say
I
there are
think
some things that are in Tasha's that are not my style, and they feel wrong to me. It's not that they're
mhm.
poorly written, but they feel to me like, isn't there a second set of eyes that should have looked at this and said, "Wait, this isn't fully balanced or whatever." But then I'm sure someone would look at something that I like and go, "That's weak sauce. Come on, shouldn't you have looked at that?" So some of it is our approach, right? And especially when you get into optimization.
Mhm.
Optimization is almost like it's like in Magic the Gathering, right? A card is either useless or belongs in your deck. Yes, the type
Mhm.
of deck you're building matters, but it's like such an on-off switch, right? And yet it can be a perfectly good card. It's just not broken, right? Or it doesn't present that advantage you're looking for, but it is great, and one could have a lot of fun with it if one were not in a super competitive mindset. But when you are in that kind of competitive optimization mindset, then everything's either a clear take or discarded, right? And that's sort of an unfair standard. It's not the standard that the game itself needs to rise to.
Right. And we'll talk more about the playtest itself when we review what Jeremy Crawford said about the playtest feedback that they've been getting. And we'll get a little bit more into that. We also heard from Shadowmane's Jason C via YouTube. I'm glad to see Wizards is doing some how to DM things. I would really love to see the next Dungeon Master's Guide be more how to DM than just here's a few extra rules. Almost like the essay books like Your Best Game Ever, etc. And I agree to a point because we have to keep in mind that there is no such thing as the perfect Dungeon Master's Guide. If you make it a how to DM book, you are going to have a lot more newcomers able to use the book and learn how to DM. And you will have experienced dungeon masters saying, "This is the worst Dungeon Master's Guide ever. They told me everything I already know, or everything that they think they already know. And now it's just a waste of time." They should have put that in a beginner box and then made the Dungeon Master's Guide these extra rules that I could use. So you're going to have to balance that. Part of the challenge of creating that Dungeon Master's Guide is what to put into it. What information is better in the Dungeon Master's Guide versus in a supplement or in a book like Cobalt Press's, like Cobalt's Guide to Monsters or Cobalt's Guide to Adventure or so on, that takes an even deeper dive in.
Yeah, and it's interesting to look at, like, if you look at the 5e DMG and you take a step back to the 4e days or 3 days, you might well have said, you know what we need? We need a DMG that's like the old AD&D. That's just full of ideas, just tables and ideas,
Mhm.
and roll through a dungeon that you make as you go, and just concepts. And that's kind of what we got, right? And yet people find reasons to go, yeah, but it doesn't give me this part. And so a DMG is always going to be a little imperfect. um, and it is hard to think of how much. I do totally want how to DM advice, and I particularly like what the 4E
Mhm.
DMGs provide, while also liking that AD&D style. And so yeah, it is a hard balance.
Mhm.
It's we'll have to see how they do it, and it's never going to be. I think that's one of the hardest things to write is a DMG. Like, it doesn't seem like it should be,
Mhm.
but it is really hard.
Yeah. And another question is what medium is best for the information that you're trying to
Mm,
get out to people? Is the how
mm,
to DM better served through videos now? And you don't have to go through
wow.
and put it all into 20 pages of text when you can have a 5 20-minute videos about these
Mm.
different aspects of dungeon mastering. So yeah, that's another thing that we
I
have to
hadn't.
be aware of now
I
is the
honestly hadn't even
media
thought of.
that we have availability.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
you're right. That's
Yeah.
that's fascinating. And then
So
maybe your DMG needs to be a certain type of book because you're going to have how to things elsewhere. But I do think that where I
yeah.
really kind of pin if I could put a pin on a thing, it's that when you are discussing rules, it is good to, or when you're laying down sort of the rules, it's good to stop and say, do I need to provide some how to use this additional information, right? Is there more than what the
Mhm.
rules entail? And often on the DMG side, there is, right? So, yes, here's how you build an encounter, but also here are some things to keep in mind, and when to put that in is part of the art of it.
Mhm. Yeah, and maybe putting it in an adventure is the best way to say, here's an adventure, and I can really call out then each step in the DMing process of the basics and show it to you, not just through words, but through the actions that you're about to take in front of players. So it's a it's an evolving industry and it's an evolving medium that we need to keep in mind. We also have Shamaj22 via YouTube saying D&D influencers might not or should not be held to journalistic standards because they technically aren't journalists, but that doesn't mean their integrity as influencers or celebrities or whatever term fits can't be questioned. So, we were talking about
Yeah.
people's reaction to the Content Creator Summit and what their responsibility is to hold wizards to a higher standard or whatever, and how ridiculous it is to hold them to journalistic standards. And Shamaji 22, sure, you can totally question anyone's integrity about anything. However, what we're talking about is an actual standard with actual rules that you can point to, a tradition that's been around for centuries, which we call journalistic standards. Lawyers have standards, legal standards. Doctors have to take an oath and they have to uphold certain standards. And we know what those things are. We can point to them, we can read them. Where is the document that tells me about influencer standards? Because until there is such a thing, you can totally judge them and question them, but we don't have a common document. We don't have a common language that we can look at. So all we're doing is making up our own standards and deciding on our own what integrity means in terms of people who stand up in front of or sit in front of their cameras and make, funny or cool or whatever D&D content. Uh, so that's all we were talking about is unless you have actual standards, then you're just throwing out your opinion about what standards are, and we can't even have a
Yeah.
rational conversation about it, about what influencers should or shouldn't do or should or shouldn't be.
Yeah, and I think that also ends up happening when someone who could be in the journalist space tries to occupy both spaces, then that puts you into that category of, well, now we don't know how to, you are no longer just serving by that one code, right? Because you are now entering into this other realm that is subject to so many other parameters and isn't subject to those other guidelines. And the if you think of someone doing influencing as a side thing, that's very different when you try to do that as an actual sort of source of income, right? That is becomes a very perilous game.
Mhm.
That's entirely different from being a full-time journalist. And you are now subject to so many powerful forces, right? If you want your tweets to be seen, you know that the angry ones will get more visibility. And if you're trying
Mhm.
to get that attention and those eyeballs, that's a tough sirens call, right? So is writing clickbaity article headlines or any of that, right? And everyone has to deal with it, right? I have to think when I write my blog, should I call this 10 ways to, right? Should I say you won't believe,
Mhm.
surprising ways to, those are all where what are there are no standards, right? They're decisions that individuals who have some level of influence or reach have to think through, but there is no standard. Whereas if I worked at a newspaper in a traditional sense, I would have to meet those guidelines,
Mhm.
right? And I would lose my job if I failed to uphold those.
Yep. So, again, feel free to judge and debate. We just can't use a common language because there is no common code of influencers ethics out there. And finally, we have Soto Rumoro via Twitter. One thing that disturbs me with the recent D&D adventures, such as Keys, is overall tone. while well written on their own, many settings give off a very 19th century modern mood and not medieval and fantasy. I find it compromises my suspension of disbelief. Do other people feel this as well? Well, I have not read Keys from the Golden Vault yet, but I don't believe it was specifically set in any world. It wasn't a Forgotten Realms product, I don't think, or set in any,
I
and
thought
if
it
it was,
was.
correct me?
At
Okay,
least many of the scenarios are. I don't know if all of them are, but many of the scenarios are
okay,
you're breaking into Forgotten Realms locations. But I have not read it fully either. So.
yeah, right. So, if it was, then absolutely, right. But if it's not, or if it's like you could set this adventure here, but otherwise set it anywhere you want, these anthology type products with short adventures, I don't give them any expectations going in. I
Mm,
don't expect them to be medieval fantasy. I expect them to do what it is that the book itself tries to do. So I judge it based on the tone of the book. Now we're dealing in this book specifically with heists, and heists are sort of a modern concept in entertainment. It's not that there weren't heisty type things
mhm,
being written back in the day,
right.
but when you think of heists, you think of the uh what's the movie
Like
with
Ocean's 11.
Paul Newman? Well, like
Oh,
Ocean's 11, but
yeah.
going back to The Sting,
Sneakers, any a number of
right?
those. Yeah.
Right. There's this sort of, and it's all built on overcoming these technological uh obstacles as well as
Hmm.
going against the status quo, against the police, against the mob, against whatever uniformed
Yeah.
power structure is in charge. So it sort of lends itself to being a little bit more modern, I think. Otherwise, you're just going to get like sneaking into the orc's cave over and
Right.
over and over again. You need that sort of differentiation, I think. But again, I
Hmm.
haven't read the book yet, so I can't really go any further than that.
I think that's a good point on heists and this book in particular. But if you look at D&D, the very first adventure ever written by TSR is included in one of the small original Dungeons and Dragons booklets that came out for Greyhawk, and it involves swarms of frogs under this keep and a main villain who is from outer space who has power armor and like a laser sword, right? If not a laser gun, I forget.
Mhm.
So it's melting all these concepts immediately, right? And those elements have been strong there. The other thing I think is a lot of people, for example, I don't want a true medieval game, right? Like I don't want to,
Mhm.
I don't know, have too many scenes that are like, I don't know, people being pelted by tomatoes or things like I do want sort of that kind of modern feel, but in that setting. So I think that's actually a thing that a lot
Mhm.
of folks may actually want. It's hard to say. Um, so there's probably a tough
Mhm.
line to walk there, and for sure you can reach that point where you go, wait a minute, what era am I in? This doesn't fit this setting. That can certainly happen. It's not that I don't understand, but I think that there may be more play there than one would think as to what the audience wants.
Yeah, the only heist adventure that I remember writing, I made sure I wrote it for Eberron.
Mm,
So there could be that sort of steampunk, magipunk technology available that could model the modern heist themes that we see in our entertainment.
It's hard not to. I mean, and you
Yeah.
you have so many, and the same is true of like the murder mystery. It's not that murdering and mysterious
Mhm.
circumstances were not well known, but Agatha Christie comes along, and that just becomes such a thing, right? And the Sherlock Holmes
Mhm.
aspect, and it dominates our thinking today, right? And anything you write for whichever setting ends up going through that sort of lens, right?
Yeah, we're always going to carry back, and even when we write about previous times in our fiction and our games, we're going to carry back modern sensibilities into those old stories. So, yep. Thank you for all the questions. We
Great
appreciate it.
stuff.
We hope our answers were either illuminating or entertaining, if not both. But we have a lot of news to get to. We have a ton of news, starting with the new D&D surveys and playtest videos. So first and foremost, there is a new D&D player survey out that they do, I think, once a year or maybe twice a year.
Hmm.
And it's similar to the previous ones they've done, where they basically ask you what you like about the game. What editions do you play? When was the last time you played? How much money have you spent recently? Do you buy other types of products, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? This time, though, they had a few little tweaks to questions that I know I noticed when I took it, and so did Teo. So I'm going to let him go forward from there.
Yeah, there was a lot that was clearly getting at why you would buy official products from a specific website. And gee, which one could they be talking about? It was pretty obvious that they're talking about, what would make you buy from the D&D website versus somewhere else. Um, and so that is an area somewhat concerned. It's an area to watch because it's that dance between supporting stores and wanting to not have to pay distributors and resellers so you're making more profit off of your product, because losing half of your sale price is rough. So I certainly get why Wizards is asking this, but it does get hard. And regarding this, they asked, um, a couple of questions that worry me as to what they mean for aspects that I care about. So like they said, quote, digital content is accurate when compared with content in the physical product. Right. And this is the idea that I can do digital updates, but the paper book is still the same. And what worries me of this aspect is that we saw with Spelljammer, they just sort of stealth made changes to D&D Beyond that they did not communicate in any way, shape, or form. And it took people calling them and say, "Hey, wait, you just changed the glide distance, in rules, and you just changed this other piece. Like you've got to give us this. Where's the errata document?" Because they used to always put up this errata document.
Mhm.
And they also ask questions like, if we were to give you bonus content, would you come to our, to a particular website? And that's where, like, please don't. It's one thing to have a different cover, although 3 covers is way too many. But when you start saying like, I'm going to give you a special subclass if you buy it from the direct, like, oh.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that I thought that was all really
Yeah.
interesting. And then they had questions about post, pre, during pandemic play comparisons, which is interesting. Maybe look at sort of, are you playing differently? Are you playing less? Things like that. And there were some things on, the usual
Mhm.
questions of, do you have this in D&D Beyond versus do you have it on paper, which are always interesting how that might drive decisions at Wizards.
For sure. So that's the one survey. The survey about the playtest for the Druid and the Paladin is also now up, so you can give your feedback there. And there was a super interesting video with Jeremy Crawford discussing the previous results from the expert playtest and the feat playtest that came out originally, and then the Druid and Paladin online feedback that they've received so far, or that they've scraped off the internet through using their eyes and their research abilities. And I thought this video was awesome. I
Yeah.
generally skip them or just skim them, but this time I sat and I watched the whole thing because finally they were doing, well, Jeremy specifically was doing what I was hoping that they would have been doing all along, which is actually talk about these things, what they're trying to do, why they make the decisions that they make, because it helps me as a game designer figure out what I want to do going forward with my content, with my games. But as a player, it helps me too
Hmm.
to figure out if the direction that they're heading is one that I'm interested in following. So I was overjoyed with that discussion.
Yeah, and I mean, I sense a change. Maybe this is me imagining this, but it feels like it's a more humble, more under less marketing to the audience and more understanding the audience kind of
Mhm.
video, where they're saying, we get how you can react strongly to this, but let's put some context. And so, like on the Druid, the idea that the Druid is the least played class in 5e, right? You have to start with that assumption of something about it isn't working for people. Obviously working for some, and we get that you may be very defensive, but it's not, it's, there's things that we need to change it, right?
Mhm.
And so that helps set the context very strongly. And then to talk through, we had been hearing from people, what if, and I'm one of those people, what if you had like stat block chunks you could work off of rather than having to look through all the monsters? And so, okay, but and then that we hear you that maybe customization of those stat blocks could work, or maybe we have to abandon the whole idea. Just talking more about those ideas, or that the nuances, like sometimes they'll say things and it almost sounds like they're talking down to you, like, well, some DMs don't know how to use monsters properly, so we simplified them for you so you wouldn't be an idiot. But this was more like there are nuances to the druid because we have had things in the rules glossary that allow your form to actually be more powerful than it was before. And it may not be transparent to people that these
Mhm.
forms are pretty strong, which also means that if we make it tiny, it's now this super powerful tiny thing, and that could be abusive given the other rules of the game. So, that was a lot of really great context. And I agree with you. I watched this video while I was on the treadmill, and I almost fell off because I was like, "Well, this is really good." And like, I'm having trouble paying attention to my
Yeah.
feet because this is so engrossing and interesting. And so, yeah, hats off to the team. I was really glad to see this video come out that way. And they also talked about the expert classes, right? I thought that was interesting too. It was good.
Yeah, what was so interesting about that was how each individual trait of a class would get a score that was higher than the score that was given to the class as a whole.
Hmm.
And then they would have to go back and they would have to read the actual written comments to see why is everything 75 or higher, but that the class itself was only a 68.
Yeah.
And being able to parse that and get those comments and seeing a trend of, oh, and what it generally came down to was they took something out that everyone wanted put back in.
I
Uh,
can't sneak attack
which
off
which
turn.
is yeah, which is good, right? That's good feedback, and it's good to have that. It does scare me a bit that since this is so close to 5e, that people can't play test this other thing as its own thing
Yeah.
without referring back. And if all you're doing is adding better things,
Hmm.
adding better traits, adding more powerful traits, and taking something out to do so, and then having to go back and put that thing that's also powerful back in, and yet keep the other powerful things that you've added, it scares me that there is this
Yeah.
power trend upward.
Yeah. And
So,
even in one of
but
the previous videos,
even knowing that is important.
yeah, and in one of the previous videos, they said something like, like, oh, you might be concerned that the paladin's getting too strong. Don't worry, we're going to make up for it in monster design. And I'm like, ooh, I'm a little worried about that statement. Um, Yeah, it's the other thing that I thought of specifically around the rogue. So they said on the rogue, like one of those examples, like you said, of like we got negative results on sneak attack, and it's because you can't sneak attack off turn. And I'm thinking that's a thing that fairly expert players catch on to. Casual player
Mhm.
won't even know that that's a thing and won't see it as necessary to their enjoyment of the game, right? So it further says to me, you're getting a
Mhm.
lot of feedback from the really invested players rather than casual
Yep.
players that are making up the bulk of your audience, or likely are, right? Because that's how RPGs work historically,
Right.
probably still today. And so, you're not getting to
Yeah.
the random gaming store, the random groups at homes and things like that.
Right.
Um, and you want that feedback because yeah, it's that idea that can someone look at this with new eyes, with casual eyes, and just say, this is totally great, I love this, this is the kind of game I want to start playing and
Mhm.
become a player for the next 30 years, but I'm new today, right? Does it appeal to them, or are you only
Right.
appealing to people who've been around for a long time?
And it's important to point out that what Jeremy said was the reason they took out the ability to sneak attack on off turns is
Mm,
because they want play to go faster. And that's the funny part is people always say, well, this combat takes so long. Why does combat? Can you speed up combat, but don't take away all the things that make combat go long, because that's more powerful.
And I love them.
So
Yeah.
it's important for the people. Yeah, it's important for the people out there who are asking for both to hear that, and to maybe even understand a smidge of game design and why these things are offsetting, why doing one makes it impossible to do the other, or makes it very, very hard to do the other.
I mean, I think I've told this story before on the show, but humans, we are so frail. I mean, I was at a table in late 4E where everybody began to interrupt this monster
Mhm.
moving, and every single character interrupted. And halfway through, the DM said, please only do this if it's meaningful. And everyone kept on taking an interrupt, even though many of them had no real effect. Like it was not necessary. And the DM kept commenting on this, and everybody still did it. And it was just so hilarious that nobody could
Mhm.
restrain themselves because they wanted to do their thing. And that's the thing, is we all want those things, but the things are bad for us
Yep.
overall. And we'd all be happier if we didn't have them. But having them is hard. Not using them is very hard, and losing them is hard. And that's what we see
Yep.
in some of these surveys. But sometimes they need to go.
Yeah. Yep. So many times, the same thing with if you put in more steps in the action economy, right?
Hmm.
We have a bonus action and a quick, we're going to add a quick action to this game.
Hmm.
Okay. And then everyone is just, okay, I did my bonus, I did my action. Now I have to use my quick action. I have to use my quick action. What can I do? And you're hunting through your character sheet and hunting through the books for the thing that you can do with your quick action. And it just slows the game down so dramatically. But we as gamers, we as humans don't want to waste that, right? So you're
Uh-huh.
absolutely right. Uh, but we can all rest easily because there is a D&D Old Spice commercial. I did not see the D&D Old
Oh,
Spice commercials
oh, you
because I
should.
don't watch commercials,
Yeah.
but I may have to hunt this out. Tell me about the commercial.
Well, Shawn, I put a link in the show in the snow notes. We can't speak today, but there is a link in the show notes.
Snow notes. Boy, right
It
on.
is Holga and Simon from the movie have completed a quest, and they've got a chest of Old Spice. And of course, at the end, it's a mimic. So I've spoiled the commercial for you, but it's pretty funny. And I think they called it like Elden Spice or Olden Spice or something. And I watched it. I enjoyed it. I thought, okay, it's so cool that we are getting these kinds of commercials, but it didn't get close to the hallowed branded baloney level because there isn't actually any D&D version of Old Spice available on shelves. If there were,
Mm,
I would have to debate whether this reached baloney levels of the height of D&D, but we're close. We're scratching at it. This is
okay.
yet another gain, because I mean that's
Yep.
a major brand, right? Old Spice. And if we just had a D&D version on every supermarket, that would be pretty cool.
Mhm.
But close, but no cigar.
I I I did see a link to D&D branded coffee,
Yeah. But
recently,
that's a
but
small
I don't
company.
think
Again, it's
that
if
that doesn't.
wake me up
Yeah,
when it's Folgers, right?
yeah,
Like
exactly,
Folgers mimic
exactly, yeah.
brew, and I'm there. I'm bologna levels
Mhm.
granted, but we're not there. I'm hoping. I'm counting on
Alright.
this movie to take us there, Shawn.
We have not yet hit baloney level. But is the commercial better than the movie? Because there are sneak previews out there. Teos saw the movie, he's not gonna spoil it because I haven't seen it yet. Critical Role bought fans tickets for an April 22nd showing in several major cities. Is it April or March?
Oh, that must be March. That's a type. Yeah, March. Yep,
Okay, a March 22nd showing.
I think
I was
that's
gonna
correct.
say that's not a preview then.
I assumed
Uh,
it's gone
and
already because
there is
yeah.
just yeah, okay, yep. Well, if you were one of those Critical Role, fans that got to see the movie early, that would have been 2 days from now, but 1 day after the show came out, or 1 day before the show came out, so let us know. But there is another preview that is available on March 26th, so maybe you can get to that. I have my tickets purchased already with my gaming group and a whole bunch of
Oh,
others for March 31st, so that is the day that I will see it, and not a second earlier.
I am amazed that your friends have not been banned from the local movie theater. So that's good news.
I think we're going to sneak in under assumed identities. But before we talk about the movie, we need to talk about Shadow of the Weird Wizard. So a few episodes ago, we covered Shadow of the Demon Lord, and a couple listeners commented that we could have discussed the less gory and less horror tinged variant of the game, which is called Shadow of the Weird Wizard. And Rob Schwalb is currently working on this variant, and he posted an update very recently on where he stands with Weird Wizard. He talks about the game, talks about an upcoming crowdfunding campaign, and there is a link in the show notes that talks about all of that. But there's a reason why Shadow of the Demon Lord was the first game that we covered, because we think it's so good. We think it's very solid and fun to play. So I personally am looking forward to where we go with the Shadow of the Weird Wizard.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we can also get D&D action figures, apparently. The company Super 7 is creating action figures from classic D&D covers, including the Afreet from the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, the characters from the Purple Basic Box Set, and the Gith Yankee from the Fiend Folio. These are $20 each and can be pre-ordered now, releasing in July.
Yeah, and if you do not have a
There's
partner
a
in your
link in our
life,
show notes for that.
nothing attracts a partner like having him still in box, displayed proudly on your shelves.
So says Teos. So says Teos. And he would not lie to anyone out there because of his influencer ethics agreement that he signed.
Yeah. The school I went to the
But
school of influencer ethics.
yep.
It was no.
Did you? The Duke School of Influencer Ethics.
I got a
I can
master's in
see it now.
influencer ethics.
It's in a subway bathroom just off campus. And last but not least, there are still a couple of Kickstarters in progress that we are following, including the Acquisitions Incorporated Series 2 Kickstarter. Still got a couple weeks left, so you can still check that out. And the Forge of Foes Kickstarter that was worked on by one Teos Abadia, Scott Fitzgerald Gray, and Mike Sly Flourish Shea.
Yeah,
is starting to wind down. So you only have a couple days once the show drops, I think.
Yeah, I think it'll be about a week, but it ends on the end of March, so you've got the month. But we just made an announcement that some of the Forge of Foes is going to go to the Creative Commons. So that may be of interest to some folks as well, because it means that as a designer, you can use some of the concepts that are in the book, including a lot of the cool tables and some of the monster powers and things like that. So.
Awesome. We will keep our finger on the pulse of the Forge.